Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Varun Mayya show, the Varun Mayya channel. I'm not sure what it's called. Make sure you subscribe if it's your first time here, because this is going to be an awesome video where I take a giant dump on the idea of owning a restaurant. You know, I was speaking to my uncle the other day, and he was talking about how his dream is to retire and then invest in a restaurant. And I just stared at him and I was like, I'm not really sure whether owning a restaurant is a wise idea, especially today. And he asked me why. And I said, I'll send you something a little later. And then I sent him an article by Peter Thiel, and how Peter Thiel is against the idea of running a restaurant because he's like, a restaurant is a stupid way to make money. And it's not just Peter Thiel, it's mathematicians like Nassim Nicholas Taleb who are like, a restaurant is the slowest way to lose money, right? You're just gonna buy one, you're gonna lose money paper cut by paper cut until you have none left. So here's how we're gonna do this. In this video, I'm first going to tell you the scenario with restaurants. I'm gonna tell you why it's such a terrible idea by telling you the factors that go into running a restaurant and how much money you can actually make off of it and how much you will actually end up losing. Then I'm going to show you the same comparison with respect to software, and then I'm going to tell you why it's a better idea to do software. In fact, it will become apparent to you why it's a better idea. Ready? Here goes. So, first things first. In a restaurant, you're living on 7 to 10% of margins. I'm taking into account a tier 1 or a tier 2 restaurant either in Bangalore or Delhi or Mumbai, any of the metros essentially, right? We've done our research, my team's done its research. We found anywhere between 7 to 10% of margin, and this is among the restaurants that were willing to tell us how much they were making. And believe it or not, sometimes you can just call a restaurant, you can build a relationship with the owner and just ask them, what's your margin like? And they will tell you. Right? This is true for every industry. We just don't do it because we're too afraid to call or we're too afraid to ask. So 7 to 10% is the margin of these restaurants, right? Now you might think 7 to 10% is great, but it isn't really that good. Because imagine you're making 1 crore in revenue, that's only 10 lakhs that you've made, right? Because the rest has gone into upkeep, it's gone into paying bribes, it's gone into getting the groceries and the food, it's gone into repairing the chairs that have broken, it's gone into revamping the restaurant when it gets stale to your end user. So many different factors that just drain your money. And of course, let's not mention having the number of employees and waiters to actually service the people that come into your restaurant. So restaurants, unlike software businesses, cannot make thousands of crores, right? They cap out at anywhere between 1 to maybe 10, 20 crores. But in hand, the restaurant owner doesn't make too much, especially for the kind of investment that goes in to get this off the ground, right? And that investment is anywhere between 50 lakhs to 1 crore for any restaurant in India, except for maybe the smaller ones, right? So if you look at any of the metro restaurants, typically the investment gone into them is anywhere between 50 lakhs to 1 crore. And I'm not saying that these restaurants own the place. This is not you buying a plot and saying, I'm going to start a restaurant here. This is going into rent, it's going into down payment, it's going into interiors. Believe it or not, interiors, especially for a posh restaurant, cost a lot of money, right? 50 lakhs to 1 crore is what you're looking at as your core investment. Then, of course, is the amount of time it takes to get started. See, you can't just start a restaurant like this. You can't say, I want a restaurant and then, call people home and start giving them food. You can't do that, right? You need to go scout out the property. You need to put in the down payment, which means you need to have that much liquid capital. Then you need to actually, get your employees in stock. You need to make sure that the food's in stock. You need to get the interiors done. Interiors take a long time. It takes like 3 to 4 months. In essence, you're looking at 5 to 6 months, sometimes even a year to get started, right? Imagine you have an idea, but the fruits of that idea are seen 6 months to a year later. It's very risky because you don't know what's going to happen until that 6 months to a year, right? It's unpredictable. And personally, I'm a big believer that time is money. So I'm not a big fan of you just sitting tight, throwing in money into something for a year and not doing anything else, not making any more money in that period, right? So unless you're doing something else on the side and then your restaurant's a side business, or you're planning to do something on the side and then switch to the restaurant later, which is still quite risky because after a year you might just find out this doesn't work, right? Remember, the thing about ideas is you can't tell whether they work until you try it. There are people on Twitter right now who are constantly saying startup idea, but 90% of them realize the hard work is in starting it, in trying it, in seeing whether you can get the distribution, in seeing whether customers really like this. It is very, very challenging to know beforehand. And to wait a year or even 6 months in an optimistic timeline to know whether something works is scary. Then there's the factor of employee retention. Remember, you're hiring waiters, you're hiring cooks or chefs, you're hiring staff to help you do marketing, etc., right? Because even restaurants are a business and they need people to walk in the store. The thing is, the employee retention in a restaurant is less than 16% in the 7 restaurants we spoke to. 16% is the employee retention, which means you're technically like replacing your entire staff every year, right? You have a waiter who's been working with you for 2 months. He moves on to the next restaurant. You got to get another one. It's a constant churning of talent again and again and again, which kind of makes it like a full-time talent hunt agency, right? You need to full-time be looking for waiters and chefs and marketing personnel and so on and so forth, cleaning staff. It's a full-time job and it is not nice to have your entire workforce turnover every year, right? The entire workforce turning over every year should be criminal, but it happens all the time in a restaurant business. Then of course is risk, right? So Jeff Bezos has this beautiful video, which most people don't watch because they're not actually business people. They want the motivation from Jeff Bezos, right? But they don't see the actual valuable content. So I'm going to play a small clip for you. This is Jeff Bezos. Some time ago, he was talking about how businesses, when they raise a little bit of money in the beginning, should take their biggest risks and de-risk them. They should find out, okay, these are the 5 big risks in the business. Let's de-risk these. Right? So watch that video.
What you do with those early investment dollars, so if you have $300,000 and then you have $1 million, what you do with those early precious capital resources is you go about systematically trying to eliminate risk. So you pick whatever you think the biggest problems are and you try to eliminate them one at a time.
The problem with the restaurant is there are an infinite number of risks. And I think we've seen one of the biggest risks very recently, which is these events that can just crumble the foundation of what you do, like the pandemic. In the middle of the pandemic, almost every restaurant in my area died. Almost every single one. Imagine one fell swoop and you're done. Your 1 crore of investment, your 1 year of time, your employees, all the money you spent there, you're done. And the thing is, for the first 1 or 2 months of the pandemic, or just before the pandemic, nobody was stepping out, but the regulations were not in place yet. Narendra Modi had not gone live and made his famous announcement of stopping people from going on the streets. So during this period, revenue was close to 0, but you were still spending on employees because you can't kick the employees out just because you don't know how business is going to do. Because 2 months later, if things go well, you now have no employees to service the people that come to your restaurant, right? It is challenging to run a restaurant because you have no visibility and it costs so much money for upkeep just to do the simplest of things. And events like the pandemic, they just come out of the blue and kill your business before you even know what's going on. And that's essentially a risk with restaurant businesses because they are always the first to fall. A grocery store is still going to be around. Medical store is still going to be around. But a restaurant, that's something that comes later. The next thing is that the restaurants are easily disrupted by tech platforms that do the same thing but don't own assets. I'm talking about Zomato and Swiggy in general. Imagine, in the past, you had a favorite restaurant and you'd call them. Because you only had their number, you'd call them and you say, hey, can you deliver something home? And because you have that relationship with them, because you've called them in the past and they know who you are, they know your address, you become a regular in that restaurant. But with the advent of Zomato and Swiggy, you can just look through your phone. You can find something interesting out of which half of these are cloud kitchens. They don't even have a physical space. And you're like, I like this. And you just order it. And tomorrow, if you want ice cream, you can get ice cream. Tomorrow, the day after you want Chinese, you can get Chinese. So there's no loyalty to a restaurant anymore. And you have to understand that most of these restaurants and even a lot of D2C businesses work on the idea of retention, right? They work on the idea that a customer is going to come today and he's going to come 3 days later. But nobody expected to have this large library of food choices where customers can choose Chinese one day and Italian the other. We never expected that. So if you're a niche restaurant, if you're a styled restaurant, say you're a Chinese restaurant or you're a Italian restaurant, then you are only going to be used one day of the month or one day of the week at best, right? You lose all the retention you once had because of customer relationships, because of these sort of apps. Now, I don't blame the apps because they actually make customers' lives very easy and very convenient, but there is somebody that takes the fall for this, and that is the restaurants. And of course, if the restaurants have to evolve, they need to now factor in new prices like the petrol prices. Because not only do you need staff to do your cleaning and your serving customers, you also need staff to go out and deliver food. So most restaurants don't do this to save money and would rather use Zomato and Swiggy's delivery people, which then puts them on the back foot because now Zomato and Swiggy can do whatever the hell they want because they are providing the restaurants a valuable service of these delivery people. Then there are two other things which are not really related to capital, right, in a restaurant or losing money or time. These are horrible customers. Sometimes a customer can come to you in person and abuse you. Now, look, horrible customers are the bread and butter of every industry and every business, right? You run any sort of online business, you're going to have horrible customers. But the problem in restaurants is that the customers pay after the service, right? In most other businesses, you pay a little now and then you pay a little after your service is done. But with restaurants, the customer can just not like the food and throw it at your face, right? So it's constant humiliation. It is constant unpredictability, which is not fun, right? Because you are actually providing a service to the person that comes into your doors, but you're subject to all of this humiliation and not knowing what each customer is going to do. It doesn't happen every day, but it happens often enough for it to be a problem. And finally, if you run a restaurant or any offline business in general, you have zero time off, right? You have no time off. You're going from one crisis to another crisis to not knowing where the paycheck's going to come tomorrow, right? You need a footfall of X number of customers, and until you get those X number of customers, you are worried, right? Now, there's one last thing that Peter Thiel and even Taleb to a certain extent talks about, right? And that is about the allure or the marketing of a restaurant to get a person in. You have to understand that when people physically go out to restaurants, they're not just going for food, they're also going for an experience. They're going there to enjoy the ambience, to enjoy the lighting, to enjoy the statue in front of them, right? That the restaurant has painstakingly put money into putting out. The problem is that customers are very fickle because you see, new experiences can bore us if we do it more than once. And we all know that. You're not going to go to the same restaurant twice. I once heard of a restaurant in Bangalore where there were gnomes, which is short people, with like an elf or I think, one of those Lord of the Rings style themes where they'd come and serve you. And I was like, I need to check this out. So I went once. And the food was pretty much the same as the food you'd get anywhere else, but it was this, nice ambience of short people. But I never went again. It's not because the restaurant sucked. It's just because that gimmick or that trick is done. I'm bored of that trick. And just like me, all the other customers are going to feel the exact same thing. If you run your restaurant on a gimmick, which 90% of restaurants are going to do, you are going to run out of customers giving a shit about you after the first or second week. Because if you look at the most famous restaurants in the world, for example, an MTR in India, they had very humble beginnings, right? They were quite an average place, but because they were average, they had a lot of routine customers. People used to come often, people built a relationship with MTR. This was before the days of Zomato and Swiggy, and that's how they built a brand and name. And even MTR, during, I think, one of the curfews, decided to pivot from restaurants to selling packaged food. So even today, you'll find MTR sweets, you'll find MTR dosa mix, you'll find a lot of these physical goods that MTR can keep, which is non-perishable. They still do the restaurant, but they're more invested in these bits because they know the risks of the restaurant that I've run you through. So why is software better? For the exact opposite reason that restaurants are bad. Because software is infinitely scalable. Venture dollars always go into software because if I have 1,000 customers, I know I can scale to 10,000. Even if my margins are the same, like 7 or 10%, because I'm no longer capped at 1 crore of revenue or 10 crore of revenue, I can now make 10,000 crores of revenue, right? And now 10% is very meaningful. It's a lot of money. It's worth the effort that you put in. The next thing is that software basically has a zero investment cost. If you have one developer and assume you can code, which is something you can learn by yourself or tie up with somebody who can do it, then your costs are essentially nada, right? You can get people in and build whatever you think people might like. And you're not going to wait 6 months to do it. Within a month or two, you'll have an MVP ready and you're testing that on the market, right? It's cost you zero, so you're not putting that upfront 50 lakhs to a crore. It's a big saving. Now, we've spoken about software businesses with a 10% margin, but in reality, software businesses have 90% plus margins. So I'm sure you'll point at the Zomatos of the world and say that, hey, Zomato doesn't have great margins, but Zomato is not the classic software business. The classic software as a service business has margins of 90% plus. It's pure software, it's infinitely repeatable. When you give your customers a plate of pasta, to make the second plate of pasta requires some effort, it requires some time, it requires some energy, it requires people, which cost money, it costs groceries, which cost money, right? And it obviously takes a little bit of time to put it out. With software, you press a button and you have the next instance ready. It's infinitely repeatable. And infinite repeatability comes with advantages, which is zero cost. If you want to pirate a movie, let's say Pirates of the Caribbean, and you want to make one copy of it, it wouldn't take you any amount of money, right? You don't need to spend money to make a clone of it. It's the same with software, and that's a very, very big advantage. And sometimes in the case of piracy, it's a disadvantage. Now, you can't pirate a plate of pasta, but the advantages of being infinitely copyable are much more than the disadvantages that come with piracy of the same feature. Now, it took McDonald's a long time to expand from their initial geography. And even till today, very few companies or very few restaurants are global chains. And even these restaurants know inside of their head that they're a real estate business, right? Even they don't call themselves a restaurant business because they know the risks that are involved in it. To the end user, yeah, they're a restaurant. But a McDonald's knows it's a real estate business, right? Now, any software business can expand geographies instantly. You want to start selling from APAC to now Europe, you can do it in a heartbeat. It doesn't take any amount of time, which is another advantage to going from 10 crores to 100 crores in revenue, which you can't do with restaurants because now you need to go take a plane. You need to go there, survey places. You need to now find talent in a new place. It's a bloody headache, which software kind of solves by saying, hey, we don't need that. We don't do that here. Now, remember we spoke about 16% employee retention with restaurants? Well, with software, retention is much higher because people get to work from their homes, like especially the engineers. For example, we have engineers who are very well paid, but they get to work from home if they want to. If they want to work in their pajamas, they can do that. They don't have to deal with horrible customers face to face, so they're well motivated. They're paid well, they can eat well, they can spend time with their family. We don't need too many of them because we don't need 100 engineers. We can hire 10 and pay them what 100 engineers would make, which is not the same with restaurants as you scale. As you scale with a restaurant, if you have 5 restaurants, you need 5 times the number of people. Whereas with us, if we have 5 times the number of clients, we do not need 5 times the number of people in software, right? It's infinitely scalable and it gives you great advantages with employee retention because everyone's well motivated. When people are motivated, they don't quit. Now, I've told you about this factor of being stale, which is people go to a restaurant for the novelty factor, and once they're bored, they never come back. With software, products only work with high retention. If people keep coming back again and again and again and again, that's a business. But you can't tell when retention will happen. It takes some time, right? And it takes a lot of tweaking. With a restaurant, if you want to tweak the carpet or the lighting or the wallpaper, it takes you time, money, energy. Take you 3 months to figure out whether that works or not. With software, it's instant. If I want to change the color of an app we built tomorrow, I can do it in like less than 3 or 4 days, right? All it takes is somebody to have free time, one of our engineers to have free time to do that. And that's not going to happen in restaurants. So it takes you a long time to get to being a fan favorite, to having high retention, right? It's not the same with software where you can tweak everything instantly, permute, you try a million combinations and permutations and figure out the one winner, which is what all the top software companies in the world do right now. Awesome. So I just wanted to run you through, these differences. Now, there is one reason to run a restaurant, and that's if you truly enjoy it. I am a personal believer that if you enjoy something, you should do it, no matter what it costs, because you'll find a way to reduce the costs and you're passionate enough to do it every single day. When I hear people, for example, like my uncle who wants to run this restaurant, I don't think he's fully thought it through, right? I think it's just like like one of those old crackpot retirement dreams. I don't think it's a real need, or I don't think he's been through a restaurant business, so he doesn't understand the challenges and the risks. The restaurant business is better suited for people who are willing to lose and risk money for their beliefs and for their passions, which is not a bad thing in itself. If you have an infinite amount of money, it's okay to build a restaurant, right? It's okay to have fun serving customers because you enjoy that, because we have short lives. Money is not everything in life. So if you enjoy the servitude of other people and making good food for them, that's the only reason to consider a restaurant. Otherwise, it is capital and career suicide. Don't do it.